with my expertise. Good.
Okay, so we are recording. Great. Whoever you want to greet them. Okay, maybe so that I can hide. I don't have to interrupt because you have such great response. Welcome everybody to this webinar. I would like to say just a few words about Tamari, who is Associate Professor of Batumi State Maritime Academy in Georgia. So wonderful region. She represents the Faculty of Business and Communication, so that is for all of us very relevant. And she has been elected as an associate professor of the online university, and that occurred in 2020. That is Pegaso International Group, which is based in Malta. Yes, so there is a lot of networking all around the world. Tamari, you are very well networked and you can inspire people all around the world. And the subject of this university is communications and language philosophy. But you are a very active person. I met you at BC. Yes, and then
IATEFL, yes.
yes, and many other people who are in our room tonight. So happy to be with all of you. She has been, or you have been, a guest lecturer, visiting professor in the area of legal, English, and business communication at different foreign universities. And you have also participated in Erasmus Teaching Mobility Program, which is a very important program, and we can all learn a lot. You are a reviewer of the International Journal of Linguistics, Language and Culture area. So that is your core specialization, apart from the others that go around. You are a member of Organizational Committee of Eurasian Multidisciplinary Forum, ESI, and you are a member of the editorial team of the International Journal of Knowledge and Learning, and also a member of International Journal of Digital Humanities. So you don't not only talk, but you also write and inspire us with your writing. Of course, you have been invited many times as plenary speaker at several international conferences and webinars. And today, you will inspire us with raising media literacy in English for specific purposes classroom with authentic materials. And the point that you presented in your summary is really very, very inspirational and important from my perspective, and I assume from other participants' perspective, that in this webinar, you will refer us all to the digitalized world that we are living in, which requires us to be regularly updated. The only certain thing is that change is ongoing and change is being accelerated, especially in the recent years. So we have to be updated. We have to be networked to begin with, and that's what we are doing within the stream of these webinars. We have to update our learners, and to be able to do it, we have to make them read outside the classroom, as you call it, real text, something designed, produced, and published for a native speaker. And the result will be that learners will read more confidently. So over to you, Tamari. You are muted.
Yes. Dear listener,
Okay.
Thank you very much for your very detailed introduction. And of course, I really will be happy to be meeting at least your expectation from this webinar, and with my modest knowledge and expertise in the field of ESP and in the field of my experience with integrating authentic materials, I will be somehow sharing how to do this job. And of course, I will be more than happy to be also receiving any feedback, any viewpoint, just tips from you, and related to importance of raising media literacy in ESP classroom. And as it was, just let me just once again greet all the participants, because I know it's quite late hour, but for me it's like a midnight almost, 11:30 in Georgia. But of course, I have been looking forward what, and I also have been attending very actively all IATEFL webinar series in Poland. And thanks to Lucina, I really just was very benefiting from this great experience of like enriching our already more or less already more or less like tense and a little bit stressful lifestyle with new methods, new strategies of EFL classroom. Especially virtual classroom. And as it was mentioned, I have been teaching ESP, legal English, business communication, at the same time like business English, and so that's why I decided to kind of like attach your attention to how important is nowadays to raise media literacy in a school classroom, because we, especially during pandemic, we all have been digitalized at the same time as a result of globalization. Of course, this is unavoidable. And of course, at the same time, as my PhD thesis was, of course, it is related to linguistic approach of newspaper genre. That's why I have been more or less researching maybe more than 15 years in like a newspaper general and article peculiarities, and at the same time I decided to touch upon the issue of challenges of using news articles in ESP classroom. And at the same time I'm going to show you within this like 50 minutes, because I know that I need to be stick to time, how to select from different sources and how to structure an effective ESP class for effectively using news articles. And at the same time I'm going to show some kind of activities which I designed myself, because when we integrate authentic materials, this means that it's a kind of headache, because we need to go beyond the textbook, and we need to actually design our own activities for each lesson stage. And of course, at the same time, I'm going to give you kind of small tips or this, and we can also have some discussion. First, now let's get down to business, and let's start with the term and buzzword, which nowadays is around the world. What is media literacy? And of course, nowadays, if we ask ourselves, of course, media literacy is a definitely 21st century approach in education, and not only in ESP education and EFL education. It definitely provides a framework to access, analyze, evaluate, and participate with messages in a variety of forms, from print to video to the internet. And media literacy builds an understanding of the role of media in society, as well as essential skills of inquiry and self-expression necessary in order to develop and educate 21st century in a democratic society. And of course, I was really very privileged that during pandemic in 2020, I was elected as a trainer of media literacy in EFL classroom by United States American Council. And I am training right now school teachers in my country about media literacy in the ESP classroom, together with critical thinking. That's why I decided to integrate with authentic materials, importance of media literacy. But when we talk about nowadays about critical thinking and media literacy, of course, we should never forget and avoid the topic of forces. And we all know that teaching media literacy provides students with skills which at the same time help them to think critically about media. But of course, it not only make them think, but of course, help them to cultivate the 21st century skills like so-called forces, critical thinking, creativity, of course, collaboration and communication. So, and at the same time, this in tandem with all this, we kind of increase digital literacy through integrating with media, information, and technology, of course. And media literacy instruction can also help our learners and students in our case, for example, because I'm mostly university-based lecturer, develop them as active consumers of information, determine some kind of like or distinguish between credible and non-credible sources and knowledge biases. Yes, and at the same time, be responsible creators of media. This is very important. So responsibility for us as educators. And when we talk about media literacy, maybe I can be asking you, but of course, due to like a lack of time, of course, let me answer this question. Effective instruction. and definitely will help our learners and bridge between student knowledge and learners' objectives of the course. And using media engage students. At the same time, it facilitates students' retention of knowledge and motivates interest in the subject matter, and illustrates the relevance of many, many concepts, which are, of course, nowadays of actual importance in our everyday communication. And I would like to somehow, of course, asking you, but what is can you name one of the words which has been a kind of creeping into ESP teaching in the past few years? It's related to the topic of today's webinar. Can you name it? What is it? And I will give you some hints. It's related to the real life. And what is this? This is a kind of buzzword, in which is, of course, very, very much characteristic in ESP classroom. Of course, is it going to be on site or really to participate online? You mean, Corina, so I'm going to ask you to predict, so kind of adjective, which is somehow a kind of buzzword in teaching ESP, in teaching EFL. So and I will give you a kind of like a cue. It's a kind of, it means something which is real. Fake news, far-catching, but this is actually the opposite to this, yes? You can unmute. Authenticity, very good. Thank you very much, Asma. Yes, of course, this is a kind of term which has become a kind of buzzword in ESP community. And of course, when we talk about the term authentic, this is a kind of attribute which may be applied to language and text which come from real life instead of course book written materials. It may also be applied to activities which do occur in our everyday communication instead of, for example, retelling or translating the text and task, and so this, which are actually used in a classroom according to the Gilmore. And when we talk about authenticity, this is related to the qualities which are bestowed on a text by the receiver, in that is not seen as something inherent or a text itself, but it's imparted on it by reader or listener. This is another definition of authenticity. So let's kind of touch upon the issue of ESP and authenticity. ESP teachers, I'm sure most of you are actually ESP teachers, but already doesn't matter, or students are naturally attracted to authentic materials. So of course, this is something which is produced of language learner, but of course, these are articles, news, maybe releases, TED Talks, recordings, podcasts nowadays, stand-up comedy programs, even emails, blogs, and nowadays interactive, even like whiteboards. And firstly, finding that you can read something which is designed not only for the language learners, but of course which is designed for the native speaker, and at the same time developing strategies to deal with the real life. Of course, it's very much motivating. And secondly, authentic materials provide ESP learners with up-to-date, as it was mentioned by listener, of course, information existing in any kind of field, like in a subject matter. This is very important for all learners. And why authentic materials? First of all, one of the challenging tasks faced by ESP education is how to boost and how to actually develop and encourage our learners around the search topics through using authentic materials, and at the same time how to motivate them for better master ESP. These materials, which are derived from real life experience, should reflect real language and finally contribute to an effective language process. And ESP teachers indeed have a large amount of materials available nowadays and widespread to be everywhere, and which can be integrated into the classroom, and at the same time to develop most effective strategies to be dealing with the real language. So when we talk about different kinds and categories of course, authentic materials, we can differentiate between daily use subjects, but nowadays we all work still in my country in virtual classroom. But of course, this can be virtual business cards, like receipts or invoices, maybe some kind of financial statements, emails, broader category. So involves, of course, newspapers, journals, TV, radio broadcasts, podcasts nowadays, TEDx talks, and of course, general and special literature. And the last and not least, easily accessible websites, like a specialist, maybe publications in the field, statistics, reports, surveys, and etc. So as we see, we have here definitely versatility of authentic materials. And nowadays, of course, this can be a good idea, like advantage, but this can be, of course, at the same time, a big headache. Yes, that's why still, when we talk about when we talk about authentic materials, it's very important to once again highlight one of the benefits of an adapted materials leads the class to the real life language application, and in general makes ESP learning process more meaningful, more engaging for learners. And at the same time, availability of great variety of authentic materials, as it was mentioned, is both challenging and beneficial for ESP teachers, since they need to pick the ones which would meet learners' needs and expectation, and then decide upon form of integrating them into the ESP classroom. And last and not least, authentic materials in technology-based ESP classroom, because still my ESP classroom is a technology-based, because we have not returned yet in a real-life classroom. It boosts learner autonomy and constructive learning process in tandem with raising media literacy. As we see, we can kill two birds with one shot, yes? So I would like to ask you very kindly to answer this very like 2 questions survey, and you can use your phone, but if you don't use, I can write this survey, so link in the chat. Let me lead. The survey question, as you see, is the following. As soon as you open the survey, you will see it. Which authentic material do you use most? Written or audio? So I will be very much thankful if you go to the survey, please. Maybe it can take not only 1 minute, and if you could answer it, and I will see results like in 2 or 3 minutes. Is it comfortable to you, for you to go to the with phones, or maybe where you can like directly click into the link and you will answer it? And I will be very thankful if you raise your hand, or like give me a sign that if you have already completed it.
You know what, Tamari? You could paste the link into the...
I did it already.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Because I was looking for it and I couldn't find it. Okay. My fault.
No worries. Okay. I see that most participants are done. Very good, Ali. Thank you, Eva. Okay, done. Because I don't want to see results yet. Okay, still, I really would like to. So we have already total. So we have already 34 votes. Let's see.
36 even.
Yes. No. 30. Let me share it. Maybe some of you did it twice. So actually, so we have such kind of like a proportion, like 55% of today's attendees, they prefer somehow, they mostly use audio, video, TED Talks and podcasts in the ESP classroom, and like 45 almost %, they mostly use a newspaper, like printed authentic materials. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. It was really very interesting for me to see what is your preference. But for example, this can be a kind of like my bias approach, but I mostly integrate, of course, somehow newspaper articles, printed authentic materials, because it enables me to work more kind of like so structural activities. But of course, I do integrate also audio visuals, like movies, even TED Talks. But in today's webinar, I will be showing how to integrate newspaper articles and how to structure and plan our ESP classroom effectively based on newspaper. And first, why do so many teachers and and mostly like 45% in our case use more newspapers. First of all, newspapers, especially online ones. Nowadays, I use mostly online. So they are more current than course books. At the same time, much information in newspapers that sometimes makes this a kind of very effective springboard for lessons. And finally, the factor of versatility is, of course, obviously significant in case of newspaper articles. And again, topical stories of newspapers are a great source of teaching material. Newspaper articles present different ways to exploit news reports in the classroom and focus on raising the level of involvement and participation the students have in the classroom in tandem with, once again, raising media literacy. So these are one of the reasons which lead me and encourage me to use as many newspaper articles as possible, maybe throughout the term. But of course, we need to consider a couple of things. First of all, sometimes, and in most cases, it can be time consuming for teachers to choose, first of all, and at the same time to adapt to the learner's needs. And of course, sometimes they may not be necessarily interesting and applicable to the topic. That's why this should be so considered. And of course, during pandemic, for example, when I was choosing newspaper articles, I really was doing my best in order to actually kind of build variety because all students, they were like kind of bored with course books, and that's why I was more and more integrating newspaper articles in my legal English and business communication classes. But at the same time, when we talk about integration, we need to consider a kind of challenges. Challenge number one, it's related to the text organization, because sometimes, as we see, newspaper articles, they have a special structure which should be actually a kind of maybe introduced to our learners when it's done, especially for the first time. Second challenge, this is of course related to the headline, but of course, sometimes we do, if we do encounter a kind of like idiomatic expressions, especially in tabloids, they can be hard to decipher or interpret by our learners. That's why we should actually take it into consideration. So another difficulty and maybe challenge, this can be related to the challenge of understanding the genre. And of course, students need some kind of help, maybe prior training to understand the features of the genre. For example, headline is frequently confusing, but sometimes there is always a subheadline which gives a kind of more graded information, and which can be a kind of like a springboard for learners in order to grasp a wider understanding of the headline. Another very good cue, which I also use, this can be first paragraph, and which usually answers 5 WH questions, which we call journalist questions. And sometimes this can be a very nice activity if you want to get your students and try to find 5 WH. So this can be like, these students, so can be asked maybe during like a pre-reading activity. And at the same time, this will lead them into the story behind the headline. At the same time, it will definitely boost their critical thinking skills. This is one of my favorite and more or less very frequently used activities. Okay, and they should be familiarized with different genres relevant to the discourse community. Thank you very much, Diasma. I fully agree. And another challenge, it is related to the references, because sometimes there are some proper names, and students may find it a little bit difficult or maybe misleading to which proper noun this pronoun refers to. For example, free speech means and everything to me. Who does this refer to? And of course, for another so for example, another example is that again, so word meaning, stand-up comedian is being sued by her husband for defaming him in her show. So this can be a kind of headache. And but of course, Another challenge is related to the idioms, especially in tabloids. By choosing a comparatively short article, we can ask students to underline any idioms, and at the same time, they can look them up. At the same time, they can also try and rewrite the article or a section of an article without any idioms, and this can be kind of like an activity related to paraphrasing. And students also, when they have already some texts, they could also swap and ask the partner and try to rewrite the article using the list of idioms which were previously given to them. So any kind of challenge can turn into a kind of like a nice activity, but of course it requires a certain time of preparation and training. But last and not least, of course, nowadays we are all aware that too much choice is a kind of headache for us, because nowadays selection procedure and selection is a kind of biggest headache for me, for example, because when I'm even trying to select an article from my business English class, I really spend lots of time because I need to take into account their preference, even their biases, even their like maybe level, etc. But when we talk about selection procedure, it's very important to take account the factor of interest. Will the students be interested in the topic? Length, for example, some articles can be really very long. That's why these articles should be avoided. And as a rule of thumb, a one-page double-spaced essay, for example, like 250 words, because this could be ideal. Language factors should be also considered. Does this article contain a useful lexical set or grammatical components? Is there too much unknown vocabulary? At the same time, does this article have generative potential? So can it be very nicely applied in the production stage? This should be like during role plays, debates, or discussion phase. So all this, of course, should be taken into account. So I'm admitting Azra. She's kind of like our very active participant. Welcome, Azra. And let's move to a kind of lesson structure, which is related to 6-stage lesson, starting from warm-up, pre-reading activity, reading activity, application, feedback and correction, and homework. And why am I mentioning this? Because it's very important when we are actually preparing news lesson based on any kind of authentic material, whether it's a printed or like whether it's like audio visual. We need to cover all these 6 lesson stages. This is very important. And let me give you some kind of tips of what should be done during warm-up stage. For example, of course, warm-up stage ideally should raise awareness around the topic, activate pre-existing knowledge and language itself. And of course, in regular classes, teachers should avoid correction of students in this stage. Of course, on the vice versa, we have to build the confidence, yes? And some activities which can be done include quizzes, brainstorming, do you agree or disagree, warming up questions, maybe prediction from like pictures, or this can be done at the warm-up stage. Another stage is pre-reading or listening stage. It depends on whether it's an audio-visual authentic material or printed one, but of course, in this stage, lessons should unlike warm-up stage, they should be directly related to the text or maybe also audiovisual portion in order to get students interested around the topic, build their confidence and prepare for the task ahead. But it's common for instructors in news lesson to carefully pre-teach vocabulary. But if the focus of the lesson is vocabulary building, it's fine. But of course, if the teacher, in this case, should ensure that the vocabulary will be recycled, will be kind of processed and practiced during application stage. This is very important. And some suggested activities for this stage include synonym matching. Students match the synonyms taken from the article, fill in the blank activity, story speculation, and in yellow, in the highlighted font, I will be using this activity in the lesson plan, which I'm going to share at the end of the presentation, okay? And another activity can be vocabulary speculation, vocabulary selection, sorting, sentence selection, or true or false sentences, etc. And stage number 3 is a kind of reading or already like maybe listening stage. This activity definitely build reading skills. This can be, of course, or in our case, receptive skills. This can be skimming and scanning. And of course, it also develops, it's a kind of very smooth move from extensive to more intensive reading task. This means that students will gain a deeper understanding of each of the text for each successive reading. This is very important for us. And let me give you kind of like activities from general comprehension question, like a pre-checking reading ideas, skimming and scanning can be, of course, done in this stage, and detailed comprehension questions. This can be, of course, kind of offered in this moment. Another move, this is related to the student-generated comprehension questions, which is more related to reading for detailed information. For example, completion of the sentences. For example, we can take beginning of some key sentences from the article and have the students try to complete the sentences from the memory. Yes, this means that we are checking the retention of the knowledge. At the same time, students can be asked to write a headline for the story or each paragraph, and summarizing activity can be very nice activity for this stage. So let's move to application stage, and whatever the focus of the lesson, an effective news lesson should extend beyond the, of course, article. Students need to have a kind of chance to use or apply already gained vocabulary and knowledge in a meaningful and less controlled way. Yes, this is kind of like less guided stage, and students should be reminded to use new vocabulary and target language as much as possible during this stage. And let me give you a kind of list of activities which can be done in this stage, starting from role plays, discussion, debates, of course, depending on the topic, depending on the subject, whether it's a different ESP class, we can summarize them. And let's, as for the feedback and correction stage, in this stage, last 5 minutes of the lesson should be reserved for feedback and correction, because feedback and correction together warm up stage, they kind serve as a bookends of an effective news lesson. And it also guarantees that the student leaves the classroom with a clear understanding and the sense of achievement, which is very, very important. And some activities for feedback correction stage includes correction, maybe review. It's a good idea to briefly review what was covered. Instructor can review vocabulary or the article itself, depending on our aim. And of course, feedback and motivation should be, of course, ensured in this stage. And last stage, it is, of course, homework. And homework, of course, it's important in order to progress in studies. And most students have little access to English outside classroom, maybe depending on the surrounding, or they might have less exposure to language, but still it's a kind of guarantee for retention of the new information. And some suggested activities for the homework stage include here research project, a task, nowadays project-based learning. Of course, this is very important. Listening of some kind of information related to the topic, letter writing, which I have been using, comparison activities. For example, students can be asked to read about the same topic from different sources, different sites, and to compare how different sources deal with the same news. So this can be very effective research project activities. And let me give you, and let me, of course, now share some kind of practical activities which I have been using in case of legal English, in case of business English. And of course, this was a story related to the legal English. And for example, I was giving the pictures to students. For example, what does this couple symbolize? And as we see, of course, people, they are just bent from the right to express themselves. This means that the article is going to be about freedom of expression or freedom of speech. And for in one of my legal English classes, I even gave a workshop and with in a summer school with German students and like at the same time with Polish students about how stand-up comedian's husband was sued for defamation in a provocative show. So this article really was one of my favorite, which really worked well, and it not only raised their understanding about the freedom of expression, it gave them lots of topical vocabulary, lots of food for production stage, discussion, etc. So this was one of the articles which I use in my legal English class. But today also I am going to show you another, of course, article which I use in my legal English class, and then it is, as you see, no, it was from from business English class, and students were asked to predict the story from the pictures. And as you see, Spanish steps in Italy as one before and after. And of course, based on the pictures, students predicted the headline of the article will be after COVID-19 pandemic, and the article was from Financial Times. And subheadline gave us a little bit more positive and optimistic information, but of course this storm will pass, but the choices we make now could change our lives for years to come. So this was an article from Financial Times, and I worked with my students on this article and designed activities based on the tips which I already gave to you. And as you see, these are the pictures of a Duomo in Milan, and which is like empty, and of course, which was of course nowadays a kind of like a stressful situation for all of us in the beginning of the pandemic. But of course, there were lots of articles, and I could not help not integrating all these articles in my classroom. And as one of our participants is writing, visual thinking while creativity and critical thinking is great tip, of course, and that's why it's very important together to be integrated with the media literacy. That's what I am doing with this so authentic materials. And another article which was also related to the topic of freedom of expression, and which I started to integrate during COVID-19 pandemic. It was, this was a headline from Guardian. Guardian is one of my favorite newspapers in which I really find really credible information. And the headline was related to the hero who told the truth, Chinese rage over coronavirus death of whistleblower doctor. So this was actually about an article about the doctor who was telling the world the truth that this was deadly virus, fatal virus, but no one believed him. And due to the fact that subheadline gave us information that demands for freedom of speech in the wake of Li Wenliang's death have been censored by the authorities amid widespread outpouring of anger. And this doctor, he himself died as a result of COVID-19 pandemic, and no one believed him when he was warning about the deadly threat and virus, the world that it is because of the censorship in China. So this was very, very kind of like a useful article in my legal English classroom. And again, it touched upon the issue of freedom of speech and freedom of expression, which I did with my students, and it really worked well because we really discussed a lot. And of course, students gave me lots of ideas, thoughts around the topic, around like around different concepts of freedom of speech or expression. Another article, which also was from Associates Press, this was about monetary policy. It was early in the beginning of pandemic and 2020, and how Turkish, our neighboring republic, suffered as a result of inflation, as a result of pandemic. So that's why my students, I highlighted special vocabulary related to topical vocabulary related to the so monetary policy, like high inflation, cut interest rates, rate cuts, like a devil's triangle, economic woes, etc. So it really also worked well in my case, and we in my business English class, it was introduced together with my students. Another So one of the articles which I also use again from Associated Press, it was from July 23, and about so again it was related to the topic, topic of so budget, so cuts in Australia, and pandemic to cause Australia government 131 billion this year. So again, after this picture, students were given a subheadline. As you see from this subheadline, 5 WA journalist question could have been easily answered, because this subheadline, as you see, contains lots of information. Yes, so it was really nice strategy for students to predict the article and to answer this journalist WH question. At the same time, we know that asking questions nowadays, of course, it's a kind of booster for critical thinking. And let me share the lesson plan for this news lesson. And it was for 60 minutes. And again, so business topics, it was related to the economic profile of the country, budgeting and recession, and the business language which was covered. It was language associated to the budgeting and economic state of the country. In this lesson, students also covered, and they read a business article and learned or revised some business idioms, and they also discussed aspects of the article in great depth. That's what I wanted to show you with this plan. And as you see, I'm also going to, apart from the plan, I will show you. So this is a full article. As you see, students were given this article in they were shared, because in online form, of course, in digital classroom, it's not a problem. But of course, in a real life classroom, I usually print out and so distribute among all learners. And as you see, so these are activities like starting from warmer to pre-reading activity, so then pre-teaching vocabulary, and etc. So in a warmer stage, as you see, students were asked to look at the pictures and try to predict what is the article going to be about. So another stage, which was pre-reading, so it was started with the lead-in, and students were asked to have a look at the headline again, and what do you think is the article going to be about? And they also answered these journalist questions. So it's a kind of a little bit detailed, but I already talked. That's why I will not spend lots of time. And during reading tasks, students were asked to skim the test for general comprehension questions and answer following for true and false questions. And these questions were designed by me. For the focus of the conservative government was met, etc. So, and in another stage, students were asked to scan the text, so to read the text for detailed comprehension questions, and they mostly worked on business language, idiomatic expressions. Yes, so Ali, you are all the time welcome. I can invite you. So at the same time, the students were asked to choose the best meaning for each of these expressions from the text. So I'm giving a kind of details, and the students then were given kind of highlighted. So numbers, and they were quickly asked to answer what do these numbers refer to. This means that after second reading, students, they had to memorize this number and pay particular attention to what they refer to. And during application stage, students were invited to take part in discussion activity. As you see, students were divided into 3 groups. One students, A's were G's represented government, NGO sector, and public sector, and they were asked after giving 5 minutes to answer this discussion question from government perspective, from NGO perspective, and public sector perspective, of course. And of course, it's always all the time very emotionally. So sometimes the touching issues, this can be discussed and presented from different perspectives, but of course, it's always worth listening to them. And for example, budget of Australian government will survive or will not survive. Of course, we could have listened different viewpoints from different perspectives. So this is what I wanted to talk about printed media. Let me, of course, also give you some information about how TED Talks can be integrated in ESP classroom. And of course, when we talk about TED Talks, these are oral, authentic materials, but in our case, TED Talks, of course, inspire, first of all, educate our learners, not only learners, even us, for our teachers. And this can be a kind of like a very good springboard and a very good alternative when we don't have like a ready-made lesson plan and we want to introduce something not directly from the textbook. And of course, this can be very good remedy in order to motivate board students, and at the same time especially for those who suffer from fatigue or like a tiredness from continuous dependence on the course book. And non-adaptive talks which are designed and which are actually mostly responding to the most actual problems nowadays, and at the same time emerging ideas in different fields. Apart from mastering target ESP, they also serve the purpose of improving presentation skills, because when they watch how well they present, how well they speak in public, this motivates them not only to learn about the topic, but of course to become as good as influential speakers with good fluency and accuracy as TED Talk speakers are. So this is a kind of very nice like intrigue as in order to motivate our learners to become better. So at the same time, we don't have so much time, but this is one of my favorite TED Talks, which I use in my business communication class. At the same time, I also love integrating effective listening about behavior, but one of the TED Talks, how to improve our conversation. Let me share it, but I need to share the sound, I guess. Let me share it. Yes. And I will be giving you, after listening like 2 minutes, how it affected my students.
All right, I want to see a show of hands. How many of you have unfriended someone on Facebook because they said something offensive about politics or religion, childcare, food? And how many of you know at least one person that you avoid because you just don't want to talk to them? It used to be that in order to have a polite conversation, we just had to follow the advice of Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady, stick to the weather and your health. But these days, with climate change and anti-vaxxing, those subjects are not safe either. So this world that we live in, this world in which every conversation has the potential to devolve into an argument, where our politicians can't speak to one another, and where even the most trivial of issues have someone fighting both passionately for it and against it, it's not normal. Pew Research did a study of 10,000 American adults, and they found that at this moment we are more polarized, we are more divided than we ever have been in history. We're less likely to compromise, which means we're not listening to each other, and we make decisions about where to live, who to marry, and even who our friends are going to be based on what we already believe. Again, that means we're not listening to each other. A conversation requires a balance between talking and listening, and somewhere along the way we lost that balance. Now, part of that is due to technology, the smartphones that you all either have in your hands or close enough that you could grab them really quickly. According to Pew Research, about 1/3 of American teenagers send more than 100 texts a day. And many of them, almost most of them, are more likely to text their friends than they are to talk to them face to face. There's this great piece in The Atlantic. It was written by a high school teacher named Paul Barnwell. And he gave his kids a communication project. He wanted to teach them how to speak on a specific subject without using notes. And he said this: I came to realize that conversational competence might be the single most overlooked skill we fail to teach. Kids spend hours each day engaging with ideas and each other through screens, but rarely do they have an opportunity to hone their interpersonal communication skills. It might sound like a funny question, but we have to ask ourselves, is there any 21st century skill more important than being able to sustain coherent, confident conversation? Now, I make my living talking to people. No
Okay, I think this is very much just first part of the video. And of course, this after watching this part, students once again they were like once again witness and once again realize that nowadays we all, so of course we communicate, of course we converse mostly via so digitalized gadgets, of course, and that's why majority of like even like adults and like school children, pupils, and even as educators. So that's why it's important for us to show how important it is to converse, how important is verbal communicate, not only with messages. That's why, and lots of tips were given, like 10 tips how to improve our conversational skills, because as it was shown by research, most of us, even especially like a young generation, they fail to converse, they prefer to write. So this is like a motivational video once again, and we can be integrating this video not only like in business communication class, in all classes, because nowadays we all say that we communicate globally via ELF, English as a lingua franca, but of course it's very important not to forget that we should so use English outside classroom and continue using it effectively, and being a good listener, and it means that you are a good communicator. That's why such kind of videos, this can be really very much motivational for us, for our learners, and this can be very effectively used in our classrooms. And I also did it, and it has led lots of discussion in my communication class, in communication media. It was this October, and so previous October in Kielce Jan Kochanowski University, and students really enjoyed it. So this is a kind of like a very small portion which once again shows us that in order to prepare such kind of class, we really need to really just prepare questions at the same time, questions for like pre-listening task, during listening tasks, at the same time, and post-listening activities. So to sum up, in real life and ordinary circumstances, we should not forget that so raising media literacy in ESP classroom boosts students' self-autonomy and at the same time ability to work individually. At the same time, it facilitates instructors to more effectively manage a larger groups of students. At the same time, it allows the students to experience real life and meaningful language, situation and acquisition and context, and introduces different types of audio and visual authentic materials. This is very important for us to say. And when we talk about integrating so media literacy, let me give a kind of recommendation based on my, of course, previous experience. Let's do plan. Let's let's even spend time and extra time and plan our ESP classes based on authentic materials. Let's make our classes more engaging and real-life experience for our learners through exposing to the world. At the same time, let's devote efforts and energy to selecting proper authentic materials. Let's respond to type relevant issues and topics in the world of business and law or no matter or medicine. And of course, it's very important to consult with more experienced colleagues of ours, special interest group members. For example, I often very much benefit from IATEFL special interest group members, and of course they can definitely give us best sites for selecting news articles and other authentic stuff. And of course, we should always keep ourselves regularly updated with recent developments in all fields, because sometimes I think it's great responsibility for us when you are teaching ESP. It's a kind of content and language integrated learning. And of course, so I agree very much with Lucina. We should not be only teaching like a language, but of course it should be integrated with the subject. That's why if you want to do it effectively, you have to have a kind of not maybe in-depth knowledge around the subject, but at least we have to be equipped with so recent developments in the area of business, economy, of law, etc. And of course, we should strive for continuous professional development and while raising media literacy in English for specific purposes classroom. This is very much important, and it's this kind of tips from me. And so I'm going to share some of the resources which I have been using while working on the webinars. But of course, if there are any questions, I will be welcoming. But maybe if we have time, I will let you watch this video, like the remaining, and let's listen to tips how to improve our conversation if it's possible. Let me move to the big video because I was a little bit hurry, but I really want to be motivated by this video. It was our pleasure.
The communication conversational competence question, but we have to ask ourselves, is there any 21st century skill? Now, I make my living talking to people, Nobel Prize winners, truck drivers, billionaires, kindergarten teachers, heads of state, plumbers. I talk to people that I like. I talk to people that I don't like. I talk to some people that I disagree with deeply on a personal level, but I still have a great conversation with them. So I'd like to spend the next 10 minutes or so teaching you how to talk and how to listen. Many of you have already heard a lot of advice on this. Things like look the person in the eye, think of interesting topics to discuss in advance, nod and smile to show that you're paying attention. Repeat back what you just heard or summarize it. So I want you to forget all of that. It is crap. There is no reason to learn how to show you're paying attention if you are, in fact, paying attention. Now, I actually use the exact same skills as a professional interviewer that I do in regular life. So I'm going to teach you how to interview people, and that's actually going to help you learn how to be better conversationalists. Learn to have a conversation without wasting your time, without getting bored, and please God, without offending anybody. We've all had really great conversations. We've had them before. We know what it's like. The kind of conversation where you walk away feeling engaged and inspired, or where you feel like you've made a real connection or you've been perfectly understood. There is no reason why most of your interactions can't be like that. So I have 10 basic rules. I'm going to walk you through all of them, but honestly, if you just choose one of them and master it, you're already going to enjoy better conversations. Number 1, don't multitask. And I don't mean just set down your cell phone or your tablet or your car keys or whatever's in your hand. I mean, be present. Be in that moment. Don't be thinking about your argument you had with your boss. Don't be thinking about what you're going to have for dinner. If you want to get out of the conversation, get out of the conversation. But don't be half in it and half out of it. Number 2, don't pontificate. If you want to just state your opinion without any opportunity for response or argument or pushback or growth, write a blog. Now, there's a really good reason why I don't allow pundits on my show, because they're really boring. If they're a conservative, they're going to hate Obama and food stamps and abortion. If they're a liberal, they're going to hate big banks and oil corporations and Dick Cheney. Totally predictable. And you don't want to be like that. You need to enter every conversation assuming that you have something to learn. The famed therapist Eb Scott Peck said that true listening requires a setting aside of oneself. And sometimes that means setting aside your personal opinion. He said that sensing this acceptance, the speaker will become less and less vulnerable and more likely to open up the inner recesses of his or her mind to the listener. Again, assume that you have something to learn. Bill Nye, everyone you will ever meet knows something that you don't. I put it this way: everybody is an expert in something. Number 3, use open-ended questions. In this case, take a cue from journalists. Start your questions with who, what, where, when, why, or how. If you put in a complicated question, you're going to get a simple answer out. If I ask you, were you terrified? You're going to respond to the most powerful word in that sentence, which is terrified, and the answer is, yes, I was, or no, I wasn't. Were you angry? Yes, I was very angry. Let them describe it. They're the ones that know. Try asking them things like, what was that like? How did that feel? Because then they might have to stop for a moment and think about it, and you're going to get a much more interesting response. Number 4, go with the flow. That means thoughts will come into your mind, and you need to let them go out of your mind. We've heard interviews often in which a guest is talking for several minutes and then the host comes back in and asks a question which seems like it comes out of nowhere or it's already been answered. That means the host probably stopped listening 2 minutes ago because he thought of this really clever question and he was just bound and determined to say that. And we do the exact same thing. We're sitting there having a conversation with someone and then we remember that time that we met Hugh Jackman in a coffee shop. And we stop listening. Stories and ideas are going to come to you. You need to let them come and let them go. Number 5, if you don't know, say that you don't know. Now, people on the radio, especially on NPR, are much more aware that they're going on the record. And so they're more careful about what they claim to be an expert in and what they claim to know for sure. Do that. Err on the side of caution. Talk should not be cheap. Number 6, don't equate your experience with theirs. If they're talking about having lost a family member, don't start talking about the time that you lost a family member. If they're talking about the trouble that they're having at work, don't tell them about how much you hate your job. It's not the same. It is never the same. All experiences are individual. And more importantly, it is not about you. You don't need to take that moment to prove how amazing you are or how much you've suffered. Somebody asked Stephen Hawking once what his IQ was, and he says, I have no idea. People who brag about their IQs are losers. Conversations are not a promotional opportunity. Number 7, try not to repeat yourself. It's condescending, and it's really boring. And we tend to do it a lot, especially in work conversations or in conversations with our kids. We have a
I think we already just are running out of time, and with this video, I really wanted to show how so students were inspired, and they really just after this video, they really became good listeners, and they were like doing the best in order to improve their conversational skills. So that's what I wanted to show, and I'm really sure that you are doing like better things in your class. But this was my modest experience of like sharing how I was integrating authentic materials in my classroom, ESP classroom, mostly virtually, but of course before pandemic, so in face-to-face modality. And thank you very much for attention. For any ideas, for any questions, you can address me. It's my email address. And of course, thank you very much for being with me and for your input. And so it was really very nice for me to be giving webinar. Thank you, Lucina, once again.
Thank you, Tamari. It's been really highly